Good evening, brave souls. I'm Grim, and tonight I'll be your companion through the shadows. Together, we'll dive into stories that grow darker with every whisper. So, get comfortable if you're ready. The night is only just beginning. Every December, the town of Hollow Pines grew quieter. Snow buried its streets, the lake froze solid, and whispers of old legends stirred in firelit homes. The locals, especially the older ones, had a superstition: never walk near Winter Lake after the first snowfall. Nobody talked about it openly, but everyone remembered the disappearances. Every year, someone would vanish without a trace, only to reappear beneath the ice. Frozen faces staring up as if pleading for help. The lake didn't kill its victims outright. It waited, like a hunter with endless patience. This year, a group of teens decided to break the rules. "Come on, it's just a stupid lake," Darren scoffed as he kicked at the frozen shore. The ice was pristine, untouched by even the softest snowfall. Behind him, Clara adjusted her scarf nervously. "We're not seriously doing this, right?" "You scared?" teased Jenny, smirking as she pulled out her phone to record the scene. "Relax, Clara. It's just ice. People fall in all the time. Big deal." "No one's fallen in," Clara whispered. "They've disappeared." Darren rolled his eyes. "That's just old town nonsense to keep kids from having fun. Right, Luke?" Luke, the quiet one of the group, stared out at the frozen expanse. The surface seemed too smooth, almost unnatural, reflecting the pale gray sky like a mirror. He shrugged, not wanting to argue, but something about the lake made his skin crawl. The group had come for a dare. A little excitement in an otherwise sleepy town. Armed with flashlights and too much teenage bravado, they stepped onto the ice. The first step sent a shiver up Clara's spine. She felt as though the lake was alive, watching them. Jenny laughed, sliding across the surface with exaggerated flair. "See? Nothing to worry about." "Just don't fall in," Darren warned, though his tone was mocking. Luke lingered near the edge, his unease growing. His breath fogged the air, but as he looked down at his reflection, he noticed something strange. The ice beneath his feet wasn't clear, as he expected. It was cloudy, rippling slightly, as though water still moved below. And then he saw it, a face, faint and pale, staring up at him. "Guys," Luke called out, his voice tight. "We need to go." "What's your deal?" Darren asked, sliding closer. "I'm serious," Luke said, backing toward the shore. "Something's wrong with this place." Before he could say more, Clara screamed. They turned to see her sprawled on the ice, her flashlight rolling away. Beneath her, faint figures pressed against the surface. Hands, faces, their frozen mouths open in silent cries. The ice groaned, splitting faintly beneath her weight. "Help!" Clara shrieked, scrambling to her feet. Darren rushed to pull her up, but as he reached out, the ice cracked louder, a sound like thunder rolling beneath them. Clara's eyes went wide as something beneath the surface moved. A shadow, inhumanly fast, spiraling toward her. "Run!" Luke shouted, grabbing Jenny's arm and yanking her toward the shore. Darren pulled Clara upright just as the shadow reached them. The ice erupted, sending jagged shards flying into the air. A skeletal hand, blackened and claw-like, burst through the surface, grabbing Clara's ankle. Her scream cut through the frozen air as she was yanked down. Darren lunged for her, grabbing her arms, but the force pulled them both toward the gaping hole in the ice. Luke and Jenny reached the shore and turned back, their breaths hitching. Clara was gone, the ice already freezing over the spot where she'd stood. Darren clawed at the surface, his face a mask of terror, but the ice beneath him cracked again. "Help me!" he cried, his voice breaking. Luke took a step forward, but Jenny grabbed his arm. "Don't! You'll fall in too." "We can't just leave him!" The ice groaned one final time before collapsing. Darren vanished into the freezing depths, his scream echoing before cutting off abruptly. The lake was silent again. The remaining two ran back to town, breathless and shivering. They tried to tell the authorities, but the story sounded absurd. "The lake took them," Jenny sobbed, but the sheriff shook his head. "Kids wander off in storms," he said, his tone hollow. "They'll turn up." They didn't. The next morning, Luke returned to the lake alone. He needed to see it again, to know for sure. The snow had started falling, soft and relentless, but the lake remained eerily untouched. As he stepped closer, his heart stopped. Beneath the ice, Clara and Darren's faces stared back at him, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths frozen in silent screams. Luke stumbled backward, nearly slipping. He wanted to run, but his feet wouldn't move. That's when he noticed another face, fainter, deeper in the ice. It wasn't Clara or Darren. It wasn't anyone he knew. It was older, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to watch him. And it was smiling. The disappearances continued, as they always did. Every December, the lake claimed its victims, adding to its frozen gallery of faces, and no one ever saw Luke again. The snowstorm descended without warning, thick flakes swirling in the headlights of a battered SUV. Taylor gripped the wheel tightly, her knuckles pale as the wipers fought a losing battle against the icy torrent. The GPS was useless, just a flashing, no-signal icon, and the road ahead was little more than a memory. "Are we seriously stuck in the middle of nowhere?" groaned Emma from the back seat, her phone dim with inactivity. "Relax," Taylor snapped. "I saw a sign for a lodge back there. We'll find shelter until the storm lets up." Jake, in the passenger seat, nodded grimly. "Better that than freezing out here." As if on cue, a faint glow appeared in the distance. The group held their breath as the SUV crawled toward it, revealing a decrepit cabin with sagging walls and frost-covered windows. "It's quaint," Emma offered weakly. Taylor killed the engine, the silence that followed more deafening than the howling wind. "It's shelter. Let's go." The interior was just as desolate as the outside. Layers of dust blanketed the furniture, and the air was heavy with mildew. Yet, a fire crackled warmly in the stone hearth, its flames too steady and inviting to be natural. "Who lit this?" Jake asked, his voice low. Taylor ignored him, stepping cautiously toward the fire. On the mantel sat a clock, frozen at midnight, its ticking muted but insistent. The room itself was strange. The longer they stayed, the more oppressive it felt, as though unseen eyes were watching. Emma shivered and turned to leave. "We should wait in the car. This place is—" The door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "That wasn't the wind," Jake said. "No kidding," Taylor whispered. The storm outside howled louder, rattling the windows. Exploring the cabin, they found a series of photographs nailed to the walls, all depicting groups of travelers sitting by the same hearth, smiles frozen and eyes glassy. "Are these real?" Emma asked, her voice cracking. "Look at the dates." Taylor said. Each photo was labeled with a year, and the most recent was 1993. Jake pulled a photo from the wall, revealing deep scratches behind it, marks that resembled tally marks, carved in desperation. He dropped the frame with a curse. "Let's just sit by the fire until the storm clears," Emma suggested, retreating into the main room. Taylor shook her head, but followed. The air seemed colder away from the hearth, and despite her unease, the fire's warmth was intoxicating. Hours passed in restless silence. Taylor sat cross-legged on the floor, staring into the fire. Every now and then, the flames flickered unnaturally, casting eerie shadows that danced like ghostly figures. A sudden groan echoed from upstairs. Emma bolted upright. "This place is empty, right? No one lives here?" "Stay here," Jake said, grabbing a rusty poker from the hearth. Taylor and Emma exchanged worried glances as he ascended the creaking staircase. Minutes passed. Then a muffled scream. "Jake!" Taylor called, rushing after him. The upstairs hallway stretched impossibly long, a door at the end yawning open. Taylor stepped cautiously into the room, the floorboards protesting her every step. Inside, Jake stood frozen, staring at a mirror. "What are you doing?" Taylor demanded, shaking his shoulder. He didn't respond. In the mirror's reflection, Taylor saw herself, but something was wrong. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken, and her lips curved into a sinister grin that didn't match her own expression. A cold hand gripped her shoulder. Taylor spun around, but no one was there. Back in the main room, Emma was staring at the fire, her face pale. "We need to leave. Now," she whispered. "The door won't open," Taylor said, panic seeping into her voice. "The fire," Emma said, pointing. Within the flames, they saw faces, dozens of them, screaming silently. Among them were the travelers from the photographs. "We're trapped," Jake said, finally breaking free from his daze. "This cabin doesn't let people go." Taylor scanned the room, her mind racing. The clock on the mantel still read midnight, but its ticking had grown louder, more insistent. "The clock!" she shouted. "It has to mean something." Jake grabbed the clock and smashed it against the hearth, but instead of stopping, the ticking grew deafening. The fire roared, and the faces within it twisted in agony. The cabin itself seemed to come alive. Walls warped and groaned, the floor buckled, and icy wind whipped through cracks that hadn't been there moments before. "We have to break the cycle!" Taylor yelled over the chaos. She grabbed one of the photographs from the wall and hurled it into the fire. The flames flared violently, and a voice boomed from the walls. "You cannot escape!" Jake grabbed another photo and threw it in. The fire responded with a guttural scream, and for a moment, the cabin trembled violently. "Keep going!" Taylor shouted. As the last photo burned, the fire sputtered out, plunging the cabin into darkness. When Taylor opened her eyes, she was back in the SUV. The storm had passed, and sunlight reflected off the untouched snow. "Was it a dream?" Emma asked weakly from the back seat. Taylor didn't respond. She turned the key, and the engine sputtered to life. They drove in silence, the memory of the cabin too raw to discuss. But as they rounded the bend, Taylor glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. Through the trees, she saw the cabin standing untouched, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. Inside, 3 new photographs hung on the wall. The storm came without warning, whipping through the mountains like a vengeful spirit. 6 climbers were roped together, scaling the jagged peaks of Mount Tranquil, their goal a frozen summit bathed in myth. The leader, Ben, was a seasoned mountaineer with years of experience, his sharp commands cutting through the wind. "Stay close!" he barked, his voice muffled by layers of wool and frost. The group trudged forward, the snow thick beneath their boots. Among them were Alex, a spry college student on her first major climb, and Ethan, a quiet veteran of the mountains with scars to prove it. But the storm wasn't interested in experience. With a deafening roar, the mountain gave way. Snow and ice cascaded down like liquid glass, sweeping the climbers into its merciless embrace. Ben woke to darkness. Snow pressed against his body like a coffin, suffocating and cold. His head throbbed, but his arms were free. With desperate movements, he clawed upward until his gloved hand punched through to the surface. "Alex? Ethan?" he called, his voice barely carrying over the howling wind. One by one, the others emerged, pale and shaking. Alex had a gash on her cheek, and Ethan limped as he helped a fourth member, Mia, to her feet. Two others were gone, swallowed by the avalanche. "We need to move," Ethan said. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. "The storm's not over." The group huddled together, their breath fogging in the freezing air. Ben pointed to a ridge in the distance, barely visible through the blowing snow. "There's a shelter carved into the mountain," he said. "If we can make it—" "We're not alone," Alex whispered, cutting him off. "What?" Ben frowned. "Listen." They fell silent, their breaths frozen mid-air. Faintly, beneath the wail of the wind, came something impossible. A voice. "Help us!" The words were drawn out, mournful and chilling. The climbers stared at one another, their eyes wide with disbelief. "Is someone else out here?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. "Impossible," Ethan said. "No one would survive this storm." The voice came again, clearer this time. "Don't leave us alone." Alex turned, her eyes scanning the swirling snow. "It's coming from over there." Ben grabbed her arm. "No, it's the wind playing tricks on you." But Alex pulled free and started toward the sound, her steps unsteady on the uneven snow. Ben cursed and followed, the others trailing reluctantly. They found them half buried in the ice, two climbers, frozen in time. Their eyes were open, staring upward with a mix of fear and sorrow. Alex recoiled, but Ben knelt beside them, brushing snow from their faces. "They're from the 1997 expedition," he murmured. Ethan stepped back, his face pale. "That team disappeared without a trace. No bodies were ever recovered." "Help us!" The voice came again, closer this time. The group froze as one of the frozen climbers' lips parted, though their face remained motionless. "We need to go," Ethan said, his voice rising. "Now." Ben hesitated, but another low rumble from the mountain made the decision for him. They reached the carved-out shelter as darkness fell. The space was cramped, its walls carved with strange symbols that looked ancient and alien. "Anyone recognize this?" Alex asked, tracing the lines with her gloved fingers. "No," Ben said, though his tone was uneasy. As they settled in for the night, the voices began again, louder now, as if the storm itself carried them. "Why didn't you save us?" The group huddled close, their flashlight beams bouncing off the icy walls. "Who are you?" Mia called, her voice shaking. The reply was immediate and chilling. "We were just like you. The mountain took us." That night, Alex couldn't sleep. The voices seemed to echo in her mind, accusing and mournful. Finally, she crept to the shelter's entrance, drawn by a compulsion she couldn't explain. Outside, the storm had calmed, but the snow glowed faintly under the moonlight. As Alex stepped into the open, she saw them, figures moving in the distance, translucent and shimmering. They looked like climbers, but their faces were wrong, twisted with despair and anger. "You shouldn't be here," one of them whispered. Alex screamed, and the others rushed out to find her kneeling in the snow, shaking violently. "What happened?" Ben demanded, pulling her to her feet. "They're out there," Alex sobbed. "The climbers. They're waiting for us." By morning, the group decided to descend the mountain, but the storm returned with a vengeance, and the voices grew more insistent. "Stay with us. You'll never leave." The figures appeared more frequently now, blocking their path and whispering in their ears. Ethan stumbled and fell, crying out as icy hands gripped his ankles. "Help me!" he screamed, but the snow swallowed him before anyone could react. Ben grabbed Alex and Mia, dragging them forward. "Don't look back!" he yelled. They reached a ridge overlooking the valley below. The storm seemed to ease, but the voices grew deafening, screaming and pleading in a cacophony that drowned out all thought. Mia collapsed, clutching her head. "I can't." Ben turned to Alex. "We have to jump. It's the only way off this cursed mountain." Alex hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. But as the ghostly figures closed in, their hollow eyes burning with malice, she took his hand. Together, they leapt into the void. Weeks later, rescue teams found the bodies of Ethan and Mia, frozen and lifeless near the shelter. But Ben and Alex were never found. To this day, climbers on Mount Tranquil report hearing voices on the wind, calling for help or vengeance. Some say it's the spirits of those lost to the mountain. Others believe the mountain itself is alive, feeding on the souls of those who dare challenge it. But one thing is certain. Once you hear the voices in the ice, there's no escape. And as the darkness fades, remember, the real chills linger long after the story's end. Until next time, brave souls.